I still remember the exact moment I realized I'd been searching for the wrong person for 23 years. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering across my kitchen floor in a spray of ceramic shards and dark liquid that pooled like blood. My hands trembled as I stared at the photograph, one I'd looked at 1,000 times before. But now, finally, I was seeing it with new eyes. Everything I thought I knew about the night my sister disappeared had been a carefully constructed lie, and the person who killed her had been standing right beside me all along, wearing the mask of someone I trusted, someone I loved, someone who'd helped me search for answers while hiding the most terrible truth imaginable. My name is Detective Sarah Chen, and this is the story of how I solved the one case that destroyed my life, rebuilt it, and ultimately gave me something I never thought I'd have again: justice. But before I tell you how it ended, you need to understand how it began. On October night in 1999, when my 16-year-old sister Maya walked out of our house and vanished into the darkness like smoke. If you've ever lost someone you love, someone who disappeared without a trace, leaving nothing but questions that eat at you in the dark hours of the morning, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this story, because what happened to my family could happen to anyone, and the truth I uncovered might save someone else from the decades of torment I endured. This isn't just my story, it's a warning. The last time I saw Maya alive, we were fighting. Isn't that always the way? The moments we'd give anything to take back are the ones that become permanently etched into our memories, playing on an endless loop, a special kind of torture designed specifically for the guilty. "You're not Mom, Sarah," Maya had screamed at me, her face flushed with teenage rage. "Just because you're 21 doesn't mean you get to control my life." I was standing at the top of the stairs in our parents' house in Meridian, Idaho, arms crossed, trying to channel authority I didn't really possess. Our mother had died 3 years earlier from breast cancer. Our father had checked out emotionally long before that, drowning himself in work at his accounting firm, leaving me to raise my baby sister while barely being an adult myself. It's a school night, Maya. You can't go to some party in the middle of nowhere with people I don't know. His name is Brandon, and you do know him. He's been in our house like 50 times. She grabbed her jacket, a denim thing with patches she'd sewn on herself. Maya was artistic, always drawing, always creating. Her room was an explosion of color. Paintings, sketches, fabric swatches pinned to every available surface. Brandon Kirkwood is 24 years old. You're 16. Do the math, Maya. You're just jealous because you're stuck here playing house while everyone else is actually living their lives. She moved toward the door and I grabbed her arm. She jerked away from me and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but something deeper. Resentment. Maybe even hate. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back tonight," I said. The words came out harder than I intended, propelled by my own frustration, my own exhaustion from trying to be someone I wasn't ready to be. Maya looked at me for a long moment, and I swear I saw her expression soften slightly, like she might apologize, might stay. But then she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence that followed. I didn't go after her. That's what haunts me most. I stood there in the entryway, self-righteous and stubborn, believing she'd cool off and come home in a few hours. I even felt a grim satisfaction thinking I'd won the argument, established boundaries, done what a responsible guardian should do. She never came home. By midnight, I was worried. By 2 a.m., I was terrified. By dawn, I was calling everyone I could think of, her friends, her classmates, even Brandon Kirkwood, who answered his phone sounding genuinely confused and said he hadn't seen Maya that night, had no idea what I was talking about regarding a party. At 6:47 a.m. on October 15th, 1999, I filed a missing person report. The officer who took my statement was a veteran detective named Robert Harrison. Tall, graying at the temples with kind eyes that had seen too much. He would become both my mentor and eventually my partner in every way that mattered. "We'll find her," Robert told me that first morning, his hand steady on my shoulder. "I promise you, Sarah, we'll bring your sister home." It was a promise he would spend the next 2 decades trying to keep, and one that would ultimately cost him everything. The first 48 hours of a missing person investigation are critical. Everyone knows this now because of TV shows and true crime podcasts, but back in 1999, I was learning it in real time, living inside a nightmare that had replaced my reality. Robert Harrison organized search parties. Hundreds of volunteers combed through the fields and forests around Meridian. Dogs tracked Maya's scent to the parking lot of a convenience store 3 miles from our house, then lost it, suggesting she'd gotten into a vehicle. We interviewed everyone. Her friends from school painted a picture of a girl who was artistic and sensitive, sometimes moody, but generally well-liked. Her art teacher, Mrs. Patricia Holbrook, broke down crying during the interview, saying Maya had real talent, could have been something special. Brandon Kirkwood submitted to multiple interviews. He was handsome in that dangerous way that attracts teenage girls. Leather jacket, motorcycle, a scar above his left eyebrow that he claimed came from a skateboarding accident. Robert pushed him hard, but his alibi was solid. He'd been at a bar in Boise with a dozen witnesses until 2 a.m., 40 miles away from where Maya disappeared. My father, David Chen, aged 10 years in those first few weeks. The emotional distance that had protected him after Mom's death shattered, and suddenly he was present again, desperately present, clinging to hope like a drowning man to driftwood. And me? I was hollowed out, consumed by guilt that sat in my stomach like a stone. I'd told her not to come back. What if she'd taken me seriously? What if she was out there somewhere, scared and alone, thinking I didn't want her? Robert found me one night sitting in Maya's room, surrounded by her artwork. I hadn't cried yet, couldn't seem to access that release valve. "You're going to drive yourself crazy with what-ifs," he said gently, sitting down beside me on the floor. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, Sarah. I've seen what guilt does to people. It's acid, eats you from the inside out. I should have gone after her," I whispered. "Maybe. Or maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. You can't know. All you can do is help me find her now." He picked up one of Maya's sketchbooks, flipping through pages of drawings, landscapes, portraits, abstract designs that seemed to swirl with emotion. Then he stopped on one particular drawing. It was a self-portrait of Maya, but her face was split down the middle. One half was smiling, the other half was screaming. "She was struggling with something," Robert said quietly. "Did you know?" I took the sketchbook from him, studying the image. Had I known? Had I been too wrapped up in my own problems, paying bills, managing the household, trying to figure out my own life? to see that my sister was drowning? I thought it was just normal teenage stuff, I admitted. Mood swings, hormones. You didn't think it was serious, I get it. Robert stood up, offering me his hand. Come on, I want to show you something. He drove me to the police station and led me to the conference room where we'd set up the investigation headquarters. The walls were covered with maps, timelines, photographs. Maya's face stared back at me from a dozen different angles. School photos, candid shots from family gatherings, images from her social media pages. This is what we know, Robert said, pointing to the timeline. Maya left your house at approximately 7:30 p.m. on October 14th. Her scent trail leads to the Quick Mart on Franklin Road, where she arrived around 8:15 p.m. The clerk remembers her because she bought a pack of cigarettes with a fake ID. Maya didn't smoke, I protested. Are you sure? Teenagers hide a lot from their families, Sarah, especially when they're under stress. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. I'd been so focused on managing her behavior that I'd stopped actually knowing her. Security footage shows her leaving the Quick Mart at 8:22 p.m. Robert continued. She appears to be alone. She walks north on Franklin and then nothing. We lose her. No cameras, no witnesses, nothing. Someone must have picked her up, I said. Most likely, but who? We've checked every person she knew. Everyone has accounted for their whereabouts that night. Then it was a stranger. Random abduction. Robert's expression was grave. Statistically, that's the least likely scenario. Most victims know their attackers. The problem is, we've exhausted the obvious suspects, which means we're missing something, some connection we haven't made yet. He turned to me, and in his eyes, I saw something that changed everything. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. Is there any possibility, any at all, that Maya ran away? That she left voluntarily? The question hit me like a physical blow. No, absolutely not. Maya wouldn't do that. She wouldn't put us through this. Even if she was angry, even if she felt trapped or misunderstood. I thought about our last fight, about the resentment in her eyes, about that self-portrait with the screaming face. No, I said again, but this time my voice wavered. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Maya's case went from active investigation to cold case, filed away with thousands of other unsolved disappearances. The search party stopped. The media coverage dried up. People moved on with their lives, as people do, but I couldn't move on. I quit my job at the bank and enrolled in the police academy. If the system couldn't find my sister, I would become the system. I would search until there was nothing left of me but the search itself. Robert supported my decision, even though I could see the concern in his eyes. He knew what I was doing, trying to outrun guilt by transforming it into purpose. It's a common trajectory for people who've lost someone to violence or mysterious circumstances. We become crusaders, warriors, seeking redemption through service. The academy was brutal. Physical training that pushed my body to its limits. Psychological evaluations that probed the wounds I was trying to paper over with determination. Legal training, firearms qualifications, conflict de-escalation techniques. I absorbed it all with single-minded focus. At night, I would return to Maya's room. I still lived in our childhood home with my father, neither of us able to leave, and I would study her drawings, searching for clues, for some hidden message I'd missed. Sometimes I'd find Robert there sitting in the dark, doing the same thing. You should go home, I'd tell him. Don't you have a family? Divorced, he'd say. Kids are grown. This case, it matters to me, Sarah. She matters. We'd work side by side, two people bound together by shared purpose and shared failure. Somewhere in those late nights, we stopped being detective and victim's sister and became something else. Partners, friends, and eventually more. I graduated from the academy in 2002, top of my class. Robert pulled strings to get me assigned to his unit in the Meridian Police Department. It was unconventional, the sister of a victim working on her own case. But Robert convinced the brass that my insight would be valuable, that I could open doors that were closed to regular investigators. Together, we reopened Maya's case. We re-interviewed every witness. We used new forensic techniques that hadn't existed in 1999. We chased down leads that had seemed too thin to pursue before. We found nothing. Every thread we pulled unraveled into dead ends. Brandon Kirkwood had moved to Seattle and started a construction company. We drove up there to talk to him again, thinking maybe time had loosened his tongue. But he was polite and cooperative, and ultimately useless. He genuinely seemed to have no knowledge of what happened to Maya. The clerk from the Quick Mart, a kid named Tommy who'd been working there the night Maya disappeared, had died in a car accident in 2000. Another dead end. Mrs. Holbrook, the art teacher, had retired and moved to Arizona. We called her, and she wept on the phone, saying she still thought about Maya, still wondered what masterpieces she might have created if she'd lived. If she'd lived. People were starting to use past tense when they talked about my sister. The unspoken assumption was that she was dead, that we were looking for a body now, not a living girl. By 2005, my relationship with Robert had deepened into something that probably violated several departmental policies. We didn't advertise it, but we didn't hide it either. We'd both lost too much to pretend we didn't deserve whatever happiness we could find in the wreckage. "Marry me," Robert said one night. We were in his apartment, rain drumming against the windows, surrounded by case files that we could never seem to leave behind. "I can't," I told him. "Not until we find her. Not until I know." "Sarah, it's been 6 years. The trail is ice cold. Maybe it's time to accept." "Don't." I cut him off. "Don't say it. She's out there, Robert." "I know she is. I can feel it." He pulled me close, and I could feel his heart beating against my chest, steady and strong. "Okay," he whispered. "We'll keep looking. We'll never stop looking." It was another promise he couldn't keep, though he didn't know it then. In 2008, we got a break. A body was discovered in the Boise National Forest, partially buried and badly decomposed. Female, approximately 16 to 20 years old, estimated time of death between 6 months and 10 years prior. The timing matched Maya's disappearance. I remember the drive to the morgue. Robert's hand was on my knee the entire time, trying to offer comfort, but I was numb. After 9 years of searching, we might finally have an answer. But answers, I was learning, don't always bring peace. The medical examiner was a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, Korean American like my mother had been, with a gentle manner that seemed at odds with her grim profession. "The remains are badly degraded," she explained, leading us to the examination room. "Wildlife activity, exposure to elements. But we've extracted DNA samples. We should have results within a week." "Can I see?" I asked. She hesitated, glancing at Robert. "I don't recommend it, Detective Chen. Let us do our job. Wait for the DNA confirmation." "I need to see." Dr. Park nodded slowly and pulled back the sheet. What lay beneath barely resembled a human being. But there were remnants. Long, dark hair similar to Maya's, approximately the right height, wearing the deteriorated remains of what might have been denim. A jacket with patches. My legs went weak. Robert caught me before I fell. "It's her," I whispered. "Oh God, it's her." But it wasn't. The DNA results came back a week later. No match. The body belonged to another girl, another family's tragedy, a runaway from Oregon named Jennifer Matthews who'd been reported missing in 2001. Her family got their terrible closure. We got another dead end. I don't remember much about the weeks following that false identification. Robert told me later that I'd had a breakdown, that I'd taken a leave of absence from the department, that he'd been worried I might hurt myself. My father, witnessing my disintegration, finally did what he probably should have done years earlier. He insisted I see a therapist. Dr. Michelle Ross had an office in downtown Boise, decorated with calming blues and greens, with a fountain in the corner that burbled softly during our sessions. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an unflappable demeanor. "You've been running for 9 years," she told me in our third session. "You've transformed your grief into momentum, but you haven't actually processed the loss. Sarah, there's a very real possibility that you'll never know what happened to Maya. You need to find a way to live with that uncertainty." "I can't," I said. "Every unsolved case is a failure. Every day that passes is another day she's out there waiting for me to find her." "And if she's dead? If she's been dead since that first night? Then someone killed her. And that person is walking free, living their life while Maya is..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "While Maya is gone," Dr. Ross finished gently. "You're allowed to say it, Sarah. You're allowed to acknowledge that she might not be coming back." But I wasn't ready, not then. I returned to work in 2009, 10 years after Maya's disappearance. The department had changed. New faces, new technology, new priorities. Robert was now lieutenant, running the entire detective division. He'd kept Maya's case file active, kept it on his desk, a constant reminder of our shared failure. We'd developed a routine over the years. Once a month, we'd pull out everything we had on Maya and go through it again, searching for connections we'd missed, angles we hadn't explored. It was both comforting and torturous, like picking at a wound that would never heal. "There's something we're not seeing," I said one night. It was October again. 11 years since Maya disappeared. We were in the conference room, surrounded by evidence boxes and photographs. Some piece that connects everything. "We've been through this 1,000 times, Sarah. Then we'll go through it 1,001 times." Robert sighed but didn't argue. He knew better by now. He picked up the timeline, reading through it again. "Okay, from the top. Maya leaves your house at 7:30 p.m. after an argument. She's upset, maybe not thinking clearly. She walks to the Quick Mart, arrives at 8:15, buys cigarettes with a fake ID." "Where did she get the fake ID?" I interrupted. "What?" "The fake ID. Where did she get it? We never figured that out." Robert frowned. "I assumed from someone at school. Fake IDs aren't hard to come by for teenagers. But who specifically? If we find out who made her fake ID, maybe we find someone we haven't talked to. Someone who knew her better than we realized. It was a thin lead. Probably nothing, but we'd built our entire investigation on thin leads that went nowhere. What was one more? The next day we started calling Maya's former classmates, now adults in their late 20s, asking about fake IDs. Most people couldn't remember. It had been over a decade. But eventually we got a hit. A woman named Rachel Torres, who'd been friends with Maya in high school, remembered something. There was this guy who used to hang out by the school sometimes. Not a student, older. He'd sell fake IDs, weed, whatever. I never bought from him, but I think Maya might have. Do you remember his name? No, sorry, but he had a distinctive car. A green Honda with flames painted on the hood. Really tacky. It wasn't much, but it was something. We pulled traffic camera footage from around the high school in 1999, looking for a green Honda with flames, and we found it. Multiple times. Always parked in the same spot 2 blocks from the school. We ran the plates. The car was registered to a man named Derek Paulson, age 43, in 1999, with a rap sheet that included drug possession, assault, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. My heart started racing. Where is he now? Robert was already typing. According to DMV records, still has the same address, Meridian, less than 5 miles from where Maya disappeared. We drove to Derek Paulson's house in silence, both of us thinking the same thing. After 11 years, had we finally found something real? The house was a rundown ranch style in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Overgrown lawn, peeling paint, a car on blocks in the driveway. Not the green Honda, this was a newer sedan, unremarkable. Derek Paulson answered the door wearing a stained t-shirt and jeans. He was heavy-set with thinning hair and suspicious eyes that darted between our badges and our faces. Yeah? Mr. Paulson, I'm Lieutenant Harrison. This is Detective Chen. We'd like to ask you some questions about a missing person case from 1999. His expression didn't change. Don't know nothing about that. We haven't told you which case yet, I pointed out. Don't matter. I don't know nothing about no missing people. Do you recognize this girl? Robert showed him a photograph of Maya. Something flickered in Paulson's eyes. Recognition. And maybe fear. Nope. Mr. Paulson, we have witnesses placing you near the high school in 1999, selling fake IDs to students. We believe this girl may have purchased a fake ID from you shortly before she disappeared. I want a lawyer, Paulson said immediately and started to close the door. I put my foot in the jam. We're not accusing you of anything, we just need information. If you helped this girl, if you know anything about what happened to her, now's the time to tell us. For a moment, I thought he might. His face softened slightly, and he looked at Maya's photograph with something that might have been regret. Then he said, "Get off my property," and slammed the door. We couldn't force him to talk. Didn't have enough for a warrant. But we put him under surveillance, hoping he'd make a mistake, lead us somewhere useful. 3 days later, Derek Paulson was found dead in his home, apparent suicide. A gunshot wound to the head, his own registered firearm beside the body. No note. The timing was suspicious as hell, but the scene was clean. No evidence of foul play. The medical examiner ruled it suicide, and we were back to having nothing. Except, when we searched Paulson's house after his death, we found a box in his closet. Inside were photographs of teenage girls. Dozens of them. Some were clearly surveillance photos, taken without the subject's knowledge. Others appeared to be more consensual girls posing for the camera. Maya was in 3 of the photographs. The photographs changed everything and nothing. They confirmed that Derek Paulson knew Maya, that he'd been watching her, that he'd taken pictures of her without her knowledge. But they didn't tell us what happened to her. And with Paulson dead, we couldn't ask. We went through his entire house with forensic teams, looking for evidence that Maya had been there, that he'd done something to her. We found nothing. No DNA evidence, no physical traces, nothing that connected him to her disappearance beyond those photographs. "He's a dead end," Robert said, frustration evident in his voice. "Even dead, he's a dead end." But I couldn't let it go. What if he didn't act alone? What if he sold her to someone? There's a whole dark web of traffickers out there, Robert. What if that's what happened to Maya? We started investigating Paulson's known associates, looking for connections to trafficking rings. We found evidence that he'd been involved in some petty criminal enterprises, but nothing that suggested organized trafficking. He was a small-time creep, not part of some larger network. Still, we followed every thread. We contacted federal agencies, shared Maya's information with databases that tracked trafficking victims. We attended conferences on missing children, networked with other investigators working cold cases. Years passed. 2010, 2012, 2015. Maya's case became my entire identity. I had no hobbies, no interests outside of work, no friends who weren't somehow connected to law enforcement. My relationship with Robert was the only anchor I had to anything resembling normal life, and even that was filtered through the lens of our shared obsession. In 2016, my father died. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. I found him in his home office, slumped over his desk, surrounded by photos of Maya and my mother. He'd never recovered from losing them. In a way, he'd died 17 years earlier when Maya disappeared. His body just took a while to catch up. I arranged his funeral in a fog of grief and guilt. I'd been so consumed with finding Maya that I'd neglected the family I still had. And now it was too late. Robert stood beside me at the graveside service, solid and steady as always. Afterward, as we drove back to his place, he said, "Marry me, Sarah, please. Life's too short. We can't keep waiting for closure that might never come." And this time I said yes. Not because I'd given up on finding Maya, I would never give up, but because I finally understood what Dr. Ross had been trying to tell me all those years ago. I had to find a way to live in the uncertainty, to build a life even in the shadow of loss. We got married quietly in 2017, just a few close friends and colleagues. No big celebration. It didn't feel right to celebrate when Maya was still missing, but we could at least acknowledge that we deserved whatever happiness we could create together. For a while, things were good. We still worked Maya's case, but with less desperation, more acceptance that we might never solve it. We bought a house together, talked about retirement, made plans for a future that didn't revolve entirely around the past. And then in 2022, 23 years after Maya disappeared, I got a call that changed everything. The call came from a detective in Portland, Oregon, a woman named Detective Amy Reeves, working a current missing person case. A 17-year-old girl named Sophie Harrison had disappeared 2 weeks earlier, under circumstances eerily similar to Maya's disappearance. Last seen walking near a convenience store. Scent trail ending in a parking lot. No witnesses, no evidence. Harrison. The same last name as Robert. "Is there any relation?" I asked Detective Reeves. "That's why I'm calling. Sophie Harrison is Robert Harrison's granddaughter, his son Michael's daughter. I understand you're married to Robert? I wanted to give you a heads up before the Portland PD reaches out officially." The world tilted. Robert had 2 children from his first marriage, Michael and a daughter, Jennifer. I'd met them a few times at family gatherings, but Robert wasn't close to them. His divorce had been bitter. His ex-wife had poisoned the kids against him, and they'd drifted apart over the years. I knew Michael had a daughter, but I'd never met her, never even seen a photo. I'm so sorry, Detective Reeves continued. I've been looking into similar cases, trying to find patterns, and your sister's disappearance came up. The similarities are striking. I thought you should know. I thanked her and ended the call, my hands shaking. Robert was at the office. I needed to tell him, but I needed to think first. Sophie Harrison, 17 years old, disappeared the same way Maya had, and she was Robert's granddaughter. I went to my home office, Maya's old bedroom, converted into my workspace but still containing some of her artwork on the walls, and pulled up everything I could find on Sophie Harrison. Social media, school records, news coverage of her disappearance. She was beautiful. Long dark hair like Maya's, artistic like Maya. Her Instagram was full of drawings and paintings, the same kind of swirling emotional artwork that Maya had created. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of Sophie's recent Instagram posts was a self-portrait. Her face was split down the middle, one half smiling, the other half screaming. Exactly like Maya's drawing from 23 years ago. The coincidence was impossible. Girls separated by decades and hundreds of miles who'd never met, both creating the same distinctive image? Unless Maya hadn't created that drawing, unless someone else had, and I'd been wrong about its origin all these years. I went to the closet where I'd stored all of Maya's belongings, boxes I hadn't opened in years. I found her sketchbook and flipped to the self-portrait that Robert and I had looked at so many times. And for the first time, I really looked at it. The style was different from Maya's other work, more precise, less emotional. And in the bottom corner, so small I'd never noticed it before, were initials. R.H. Robert Harrison. My husband had drawn that picture, not Maya. But why? And why had he let me believe it was hers? I sat there in the closet, surrounded by my sister's things, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe he'd drawn it as an example for her, an art lesson. Maybe she'd copied his style. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But then I remembered something else. That first night when Robert had found the sketchbook and showed me the drawing, he'd said she was struggling with something, planting the suggestion that Maya had been troubled, potentially suicidal, potentially a runaway. What if it had all been misdirection? What if Robert had drawn that picture and placed it in Maya's sketchbook specifically to mislead the investigation? My phone rang. Robert. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice warm. "I'm heading home early. Thought we could grab dinner somewhere nice." "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "See you soon?" I hung up and stared at the sketchbook in my hands. I was probably being paranoid. Robert had dedicated 2 decades to finding Maya. He'd been my rock, my partner, the one person who never gave up when everyone else had moved on. But Sophie Harrison was missing. Sophie Harrison with her split-face self-portrait that matched a drawing Robert had made, a drawing he'd let me believe was Maya's. I needed to talk to Detective Reeves again. I needed to see Sophie's case file. But I couldn't let Robert know what I was thinking. Not yet. Not until I was sure. Because if I was right, if the man I'd trusted for 23 years, the man I'd married, the man who'd helped me search for my sister was actually the person who'd taken her, then I'd been sleeping beside a monster, and his granddaughter was in terrible danger. I met Detective Amy Reeves at a coffee shop in Boise the next morning, telling Robert I had a meeting with a witness on a different case. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and competent, with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "I know this must be incredibly difficult, given your personal connection." I opened the folder. Sophie's case file. Photos of a beautiful girl with her whole life ahead of her. Witness statements, timeline. It was like looking at Maya's file from 23 years ago. "Tell me about your husband's relationship with his granddaughter," Detective Reeves said. "He doesn't have one. He's estranged from his son. I don't think he'd seen Sophie in years." "Are you sure about that?" The question hung in the air. Was I sure? I'd taken Robert's word for it, never questioned his family dynamics, because they seemed painful for him to discuss. Sophie's mother, Michael's ex-wife, told us that Sophie had been in contact with an older man, Detective Reeves continued. Someone she'd met online who claimed to be an art mentor, someone who understood her creative struggles. The messages were sent from an encrypted account. But before Sophie disappeared, she told a friend she was planning to meet this mentor in person. My mouth went dry. "Do you have the messages?" Detective Reeves pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots. The messages were supportive, encouraging, praising Sophie's artwork. They referenced mental health struggles, feeling misunderstood by family, the pressure of living up to expectations. "This is grooming," I said. "Classic predator behavior." "Exactly. And when I started researching similar cases, your sister's disappearance matched the pattern. Artistic teenage girl, reportedly struggling with mental health issues, disappeared without a trace." "Maya wasn't struggling with mental health issues. That was..." I stopped. "That was a narrative someone created after she disappeared, based on a single drawing that I thought was hers." I showed Detective Reeves the photo I'd taken of Maya's sketchbook, zooming in on the initials ARH. "Your husband is an artist?" she asked. He sketched things for cases, crime scene reconstructions, but I never thought..." I couldn't finish the sentence. Detective Reeves leaned forward. "Detective Chen, Sarah, I need you to think very carefully about everything you know about your husband. Is there any possibility, any at all, that he could be involved in these disappearances?" The question I'd been avoiding asking myself. The question that, once spoken aloud, couldn't be unasked. I thought about Robert showing up at our house that first morning, so quick to respond to the missing person report, taking charge of the investigation, steering us towards certain suspects and away from others. The Derek Paulson lead that had ended with a convenient suicide. I thought about how he'd kept me close all these years, made me dependent on him, isolated me from anyone who might notice inconsistencies in his story. I thought about his promise to find Maya, a promise he'd never kept because he'd never intended to keep it. And I thought about the coffee mug shattering on my kitchen floor when I'd realized the truth I'd been refusing to see for 23 years. "Yes," I whispered, "it's possible." Detective Reeves and I spent the next 3 days building a case against Robert Harrison in secret. We couldn't go to the Meridian PD. Robert was the lieutenant there, respected and trusted. If we tipped him off before we had solid evidence, he'd disappear. And Sophie would die if she wasn't dead already. We started by pulling his service records, looking for gaps in his timeline. Robert had been a cop for 30 years, but there were periods, several weeks here and there, when he'd taken personal leave. When I asked him about those absences years ago, he'd said they were for family issues related to his divorce. Detective Reeves contacted the jurisdictions where Robert had worked before Meridian. In each city, there were unsolved disappearances of teenage girls. 3 in Seattle before he transferred to Meridian, 2 in Spokane before that. All artistic girls between 15 and 18 years old. All last seen near convenience stores or similar locations. All vanishing without a trace. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it, but Robert was smart. He'd kept the disappearances spread out over years and across different jurisdictions, ensuring no one would connect them. He'd used his position in law enforcement to stay close to investigations, to steer them away from himself. And he'd used me, my grief, my guilt, my desperation, to maintain his cover. What better alibi than being the detective obsessed with solving the case, married to the victim's sister? We obtained a warrant for his home computer, the one in his office that I'd never thought to check. The digital forensics team found the encrypted messaging account that had been communicating with Sophie. They found others too, conversations with girls going back years, all using similar tactics, offering mentorship, understanding, validation, luring them to meetings. We found photographs, dozens of girls, hundreds of images. Some clothed, some not, some clearly alive when the photos were taken, others weren't. And we found Maya, photos of my sister I'd never seen before. Maya in a basement room I didn't recognize, looking terrified. Maya bound and gagged. Maya pleading with the camera, Maya dead. The photos were time-stamped. The last one was taken on October 17th, 1999, 3 days after she disappeared, 2 days after Robert took charge of her missing person case. I don't remember much about the moments after seeing those photos. Detective Reeves told me later that I'd collapsed, that I'd screamed until my throat was raw, that I'd had to be sedated. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Robert was sitting beside me, holding my hand, his face creased with concern. "You gave me quite a scare," he said softly. "The doctors think it might have been a panic attack. Stress from everything with Sophie's case." He was so convincing, so caring. Looking at him, I could almost believe I'd imagined everything, that the man who'd spent 23 years helping me search for Maya couldn't possibly be the monster who'd killed her. But I'd seen the photos. I knew the truth. "Where is she?" I asked, keeping my voice weak, playing along. "Where's who, honey?" "Sophie. Is there any news about Sophie?" Robert's expression became grave. "Not yet. But we'll find her. I promise you, Sarah, we'll bring her home." The same promise he'd made about Maya. The same lie. Detective Reeves had told me to act normal, to not let Robert suspect we knew anything until we could arrest him somewhere he couldn't access weapons or hostages. But lying in that hospital bed, looking at the man who'd murdered my sister, I felt a rage so pure it burned away everything else. "I need to use the bathroom," I said. Robert helped me up, solicitous and gentle. The bathroom was small, institutional. I locked the door and pulled out my phone. Detective Reeves had given me a burner before we'd executed the search warrant. I texted her. "I'm with him. Tell me where to bring him." The response came seconds later. "No, Wait for backup. He's dangerous. But I was beyond waiting, beyond being careful. Sophie was still missing, still alive somewhere if we were lucky. And Robert was the only one who knew where she was. I came out of the bathroom. I want to go home, I told Robert. I hate hospitals. The doctor wants to keep you overnight for observation. I'm fine. Please, Robert. I just want to be in my own bed. He studied my face, and for a moment I thought he saw through the performance. But then he nodded. Okay, I'll sign you out. We drove home in his car. I kept my hand on my service weapon, concealed under my jacket, ready to use it if necessary. Robert made small talk about work, about what we should have for dinner, about plans for the weekend. Normal conversation. As if he wasn't a serial killer, as if he hadn't murdered my sister and God knows how many other girls. We pulled into our driveway, the house we'd bought together, the life we'd built on a foundation of lies. I need to tell you something, I said as we walked to the door. Robert unlocked it, stepping inside. What is it? I pulled my gun and pointed it at his chest. I know what you did. I know everything. For a long moment, Robert just looked at me. Then his expression changed. The mask of concern and love fell away, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. How long have you known? He asked calmly. Long enough. Where's Sophie? Sophie's dead, Sarah. She's been dead since the day after she disappeared. Just like Maya, just like all of them. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. You're lying. You kept Maya alive for 3 days. The photos were time-stamped. Robert smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. You've seen the photos then? Good. I wondered if you'd ever figure it out. I have to admit, I didn't think you would. You were always so trusting, so desperate to believe I was trying to help you. Why? My voice broke on the word. Why Maya? Why any of them? Because I could. Because they were beautiful and broken, and no one was watching them closely enough. Because killing them made me feel alive in a way nothing else ever has. He took a step toward me, and I tightened my grip on the gun. Don't move. Are you going to shoot me, Sarah? After everything we've been through together? After all the years you've loved me? I never loved you. I loved the man I thought you were. That person doesn't exist. Oh, but he does. I am that man. The devoted detective, the loving husband. Those parts of me are real. I can be both things. That's what you never understood. People aren't simple. We're complicated, contradictory. Where's Sophie? I asked again. I told you she's... I shot him. Not to kill in the shoulder. Enough to drop him, but not enough to be lethal. He went down hard, gasping in pain and shock. I stepped closer, keeping the gun trained on him. You're going to tell me where Sophie is, and then you're going to tell me where you buried Maya and all the others, and you're going to do it now or the next bullet goes through your skull. Robert looked up at me, blood seeping through his fingers where he clutched his shoulder, and he laughed. You won't kill me. You're not a murderer, Sarah. You're a good person. That's why I chose you. That's why you were perfect. Chose me for what? To be my cover, my alibi, my protection, a detective married to a victim's sister, both of us obsessed with solving the case. No one would ever suspect me, and you played your part perfectly for 23 years. Behind me, I heard the front door crash open. Detective Reeves and a tactical team poured into the house, weapons drawn. Detective Chen, lower your weapon, Reeves commanded. I didn't move. Couldn't move. I wanted to pull the trigger, to end him, to erase him from existence. Sarah, Detective Reeves said more gently, I know what you're feeling, but this isn't the way. Let us take him. Let him face justice." "He'll never tell us where Sophie is," I said. "He'll never tell us where any of them are." "Maybe not, but killing him won't bring them back." I stood there, gun pointed at Robert's head, my finger on the trigger. It would be so easy. One squeeze, and it would all be over. But Reeves was right. Killing him wouldn't bring Maya back, wouldn't save Sophie, would just make me like him. Someone who chose violence, who chose death. I lowered the gun. The tactical team moved in, securing Robert, reading him his rights. Detective Reeves took my weapon and led me outside, where more police vehicles were arriving, lights flashing in the dusk. "We'll find Sophie," she told me. "We'll search every property he owns, every place he's worked, every connection we can trace. We'll find her." But we both knew the odds. If Robert said Sophie was dead, she probably was. I'd failed again. Failed Maya, failed Sophie, failed all the girls whose photos were on Robert's computer, girls whose families were still waiting for answers. Except Robert Harrison was a narcissist and a sadist, and those traits became our advantage. He wanted recognition for his work, wanted to demonstrate how clever he'd been, how he'd fooled everyone for so long. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he agreed to show us where the bodies were buried. There were 11 girls. 11 families who'd spent years wondering, hoping, grieving. Robert had kept them in a climate-controlled storage unit he'd rented under a false name, preserved like specimens, like trophies. Maya was there. I'd known she would be, but seeing her remains, finally having physical confirmation that she was gone, broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal. But Sophie Harrison wasn't there. "I told you she was dead," Robert said when we pressed him about her. "But I didn't say I'd buried her with the others. Sophie was special, different." "Where is she?" I demanded. We were in an interrogation room. Robert in an orange jumpsuit and shackles, his shoulder bandaged from where I'd shot him. He looked smaller somehow, less threatening now that everyone could see him for what he really was. "She reminded me of you," he said. "That same fierce determination, that same refusal to give up. I couldn't keep her with the others. She deserved better." "Tell me where she is." "First, I want something from you. I want you to understand why I did it, why I chose this life. I don't care why, but you should, because understanding is the only way to prevent it from happening again. There are others like me out there, Sarah. Men who hide behind badges and authority, who use the system to feed their appetites. If you don't understand how we think, how we operate, you'll never stop us." It was manipulation, one final attempt to control the narrative. But I needed Sophie's location, needed to bring at least one girl home alive. "Fine," I said. "Tell me." Robert leaned back in his chair. "When I was 12 years old, I found a bird with a broken wing in my backyard. I brought it inside, put it in a cage, told my mother I was going to nurse it back to health, but I didn't. I watched it die instead, slowly, over days, and I felt powerful, like I was a god who controlled life and death." He continued talking, describing a progression from animals to people, from fantasy to action. He'd killed his first victim at 22, a prostitute in Seattle who'd never been reported missing. He'd been careful after that, selecting victims who wouldn't be looked for too hard, who existed on the margins. But then he'd realized that being involved in the investigations gave him even more power. He could choose the victims, control the narrative, ensure he'd never be caught. Until Maya. She was perfect, he said. Young, beautiful, artistic, troubled. Everything I looked for. But I made a mistake. I didn't realize she had a sister who would never give up. You were supposed to move on eventually, Sarah. You were supposed to accept that she was gone and get on with your life. But you didn't. You became a detective. You made yourself my partner. So you decided to use me. At first, I thought about killing you too. Making it look like suicide, grief overwhelming you. But then I realized you could be useful. Your dedication to finding Maya made me look dedicated too. And when I started to care about you, really care, I thought maybe I could have both. The normal life with you and the other life. The one that fed the darkness. You never cared about me. You're incapable of caring about anyone. Robert's expression became almost sad. That's where you're wrong. I did care. I do care. In my own way. That's why I'm going to tell you where Sophie is. Because, despite everything, I don't want you to suffer anymore. He gave us an address, a cabin in the mountains, 3 hours from Meridian, registered to one of his aliases. Detective Reeves organized a tactical response team, and I insisted on going with them. The drive to the cabin felt endless. I kept thinking about Sophie, about whether we'd be too late, whether Robert had been lying about keeping her separate from the others. We arrived at dawn. The cabin was small, isolated, surrounded by pine trees. The tactical team breached the door, clearing the rooms one by one. Clear, clear! We've got a live victim in the basement. I ran down the stairs and found Sophie Harrison chained to a wall, unconscious but breathing. She was dehydrated, malnourished, traumatized, but alive. Paramedics got her stabilized and transported her to the hospital. I rode with her, holding her hand, promising her that she was safe now, that the monster who'd taken her would never hurt anyone again. She woke up 3 hours later. Her father, Michael, was there. Robert's estranged son, who I'd contacted as soon as we found Sophie. When she saw him, she started crying, and he gathered her into his arms, both of them shaking with relief and trauma. You saved her, Michael said to me later in the hospital waiting room. My father took her, but you brought her back. I should have seen it sooner, I replied. All those years, and I never suspected. He fooled everyone. That's what predators do. They're experts at wearing masks. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. About masks and monsters. About how the people who hurt us most are often the ones we trust completely. Robert Harrison pled guilty to 11 counts of first-degree murder. The death penalty was off the table per the plea agreement, but he was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He'll die in prison, alone and forgotten, which seems like a more fitting end than the notoriety of an execution. The families of his victims got closure, however painful. Maya came home, and we buried her next to our mother and father. I spoke at the service, saying the things I should have said 23 years earlier, that I loved her, that I was sorry, that she deserved better than what life and death had given her. Sophie Harrison recovered, slowly but steadily. She's in college now, studying psychology, wanting to help other victims of violence. She and I talk sometimes. We're bound together by trauma and survival, by the fact that we both lost pieces of ourselves to Robert Harrison, but refused to let him take everything. I left the Meridian Police Department. couldn't stay in a place so saturated with memories of Robert. Detective Reeves helped me get a position with the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children Division. I work cold cases now. Missing children, unsolved murders, all the lost souls who deserve someone to fight for them. I think about Maya every day, about the artist she might have become, the life she might have lived, about the 16-year-old girl who walked out of our house after an argument and into the hands of a monster. But I also think about Sophie, who survived, about the other victims we found because of Robert's confession, families who finally have answers, about the good that can come even from the most terrible evil. Someone asked me recently if I believe in closure, if finding out what happened to Maya gave me peace. The answer is complicated. I know what happened now. I know who took her and why. I've seen justice served, at least in the legal sense, but peace, that's harder. I carry the weight of 23 years of searching in the wrong direction, of sleeping beside my sister's killer, of building a life with a man who was using my grief as camouflage for his crimes. I carry the guilt of not seeing what was right in front of me, of all the girls who might have been saved if I'd been smarter, more perceptive, less trusting. But I also carry something else, hope. Because Sophie lived, because other families got answers, because Robert Harrison is locked away forever, unable to hurt anyone else. And because every cold case I solve now, every missing child I bring home, every predator I help catch, is a kind of redemption. Not for Robert. He doesn't get redemption, but for me, for Maya, for all the lost girls who deserve someone to remember them, to fight for them, to never give up. That last night when I stood in my kitchen and finally saw the truth, when the coffee mug shattered and reality came crashing down, that moment destroyed my world. But from that destruction came clarity, purpose, a mission. I am Detective Sarah Chen. My sister was murdered by someone I loved. I spent 23 years searching for the wrong person, but I found her in the end. And I brought her home. And I saved one girl who would have been the next victim. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something, and sometimes something is all we get. The last time I visited Maya's grave, I brought some of her old artwork. Sophie had helped me frame them, the real drawings, the ones Maya actually created, full of life and color and the promise of who she might have become. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, I told my sister. But I saved someone else, and I'm going to keep saving them for you, for all of you. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Somewhere in the world, there are other Mayas, other Sophies, other families waiting for answers that might never come. But they have me now. They have someone who knows what it's like to search and search and search, to refuse to give up even when all hope seems lost. They have someone who learned the hard way that the worst monsters sometimes wear the most convincing masks. And they have someone who will never stop fighting, never stop searching, never stop bringing the lost ones home. Because that's what we owe them. That's what we owe ourselves. Justice, truth, and the stubborn, relentless hope that even in the darkest cases, light can still break through.